Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of Decoding the Unknown. Did Mallory and Irvine succeed in summiting Everest? Oh, are these the guys? Like, I'm completely blanking on the doo-doos. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay? Tenzing Norgay? Oh, it's bad that I can't remember that dude's name. These are the other guys who potentially did it first, right? But then they died. And there's discussion of whether they were halfway up or halfway down. I mean, not literally halfway up, but like near the top or on the way down. Something like that, right? Anyway, forward to the show. Katie writes it, I reads it. Welcome. I reads it. You got one job, Simon, and you can't even read. Let's get into it. As the highest point on the planet, it's only natural that humans would attempt to conquer Mount Everest. With an oxygen level only a third of what it is at sea level, treacherous crags, crevices, icy cliffs, and unpredictable weather, it wasn't until 1953 that Sir Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, got it right the second time, I suppose, were confirmed to be the first to summit the mountain. But there had been previous expeditions, including George Mallory's attempt in 1924, which had gotten tantalizingly close. That's a long time before. That's nearly 30 years previously. Wow. Mallory and his partner, Sandy Irving, died on the mountainside, but recent discoveries have reopened the 100-year-old question as to whether or not they were actually the first to make it to the top, and that's just one of the mysteries surrounding what happened to these pioneering climbers. I mean, wait, how could we possibly solve this? It's like, oh no, they left a little thing at the top. We would have found that already, no? Anyway, I guess we're going to find out. Let's jump in. Today's video is sponsored by Incogni. You know those random calls and emails you get from companies that you've never heard of? Well, yeah, that's your personal data. It's being bought and sold behind the scenes. Incogni is a tool. Well, they actually do something about that, so you can live a life without constantly getting, just stop calling me random people. I got an email just now. I bet it's junk. Oh. It's not junk, but most of it's junk. This is from somebody who works for me. Bad example, but normally it would be junk. What you do is you sign up to Incogni and it starts sending legal removal requests to all of those data brokers that are selling your information. It does it automatically. I've used it to wipe out my info from dozens of sites that had no business holding it. You might even find they've got old address, old phone numbers, and, well, honestly, it's more scary when they've got new phone numbers and new addresses, which is worse. So, it's great if you're sick of spam, but also, look, if you apply for jobs, renting, or just want to make your digital footprint less of a liability, which honestly you should, that's what Incogni's for. Take your personal data back with Incogni, use the code UNKNOWN at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/unknown. And now back to today's episode. Everest facts. Just so we know what we're dealing with here, to get to the top of the world, here are some brief facts about Mount Everest, also known as Sagarmatha in Nepalese and Chomolungma in Tibetan. It's not, isn't it? I vaguely remember this fact. I think it's actually called Everest, because the guy who discovered it was like Colonel Everest or something, but everyone pronounces it Everest. That's just what it's become. It's not technically the tallest mountain on the planet because there's a volcano in Hawaii that's about a mile taller, but most of that is underwater. Everest is the highest point on Earth, though, with its peak measured in the year 2020 at 29,032 feet, or about 8,850 meters above sea level. Yeah, look, no shade, Hawaii, but that doesn't matter. Like, it's the highest point, right? Like, that's what people are excited about. I've never heard of this mountain in Hawaii. For comparison, this is about 4/5 as deep as James Cameron made it into the Mariana Trench, about 1.5 times as tall as Mount Kilimanjaro, or about 6,019 Danny DeVitos joined by crampons and climbing ropes. And Everest is actually growing at a rate of about 2 to 4 millimeters per year thanks to its continental plate action, which seems to be compensating for any erosion that's taking place at the same time. There are various routes that climbers can use to get to the top, and 3 faces to choose from as your access points, 1 from the Nepal side and 2 from the Tibetan side. Mountaineer Alan Arnett lists 20 possible routes between the 3 faces. However, most of these are deemed as non-standard, and some have only had 1 successful summit. In general, most people use either the South Col route from the Nepal side, also called the Southeast Ridge route, and the Northeast Ridge route from the Tibet side. For reference, Hillary and Norgay successfully summited via the Southeast Ridge route, whereas Mallory and Irving were last seen on what is now the Northeast Ridge route area. I remember reading a book about someone climbing Everest, although apologies to the author, I can't remember what it was called, but the thing that I do remember is that he said that because of all the acclimating you have to do, you can't just climb straight up it. You need to to make camp and keep shuttling between them in order to get used to the atmosphere. You also need to sort out your equipment and wait for the right weather. Because of all the upping and downing, you end up climbing the equivalent of about 3 Everests in your overall attempt. I mean, yeah, to be fair, like to whoever wrote that book, it's like that's a fact. It's like this is I know that, and I don't think I've ever read a book about Everest. It's just like something that I've heard. Nowadays, who hasn't climbed Everest? With modern gear, established routes, and experienced guides and porters, it's almost become a tourist attraction. I'd say not almost, it is a tourist attraction. Like going to base camp, I think is quite simple. You could just go. And then climbing it is enormously expensive and slightly treacherous, but you're probably going to be able to make it to the top if you do like training and with 358 people reaching the summit in one day in May 2019. Oh my God, can you imagine being like Tenzing and Norgay? Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary, getting to the top after all this treacherousness and being like, oh, well, no, there's like a well-off dentist did it along with 358 other people in like one day. Don't be fooled, though. It's still an extreme proposition with a high possibility of death or injury. Since expeditions began in earnest in 1922, over 340 people have died on the slopes due to various things, ranging from health issues such as stroke and cardiac arrest to falls and avalanches. In April 2015, 90 people died on Everest in an avalanche caused by an earthquake, making it the mountain's deadliest day. It was also a deadly day in general, as the 7.8 magnitude quake also caused over 9,000 deaths in Nepal. Oh my God. The fact that they made a movie, didn't they? Was it called Everest? About that day in 2015. And meanwhile, 9,000 people died in Nepal. It's like, wasn't even aware of that. Crazy. While we're here, oh, by the way, as I make it onto the second page, I'm going to sign this script. And if you'd like to purchase it or any of the other scripts that we use here on this show, visit the merch store. There's a link below. Pick up a signed, screen-used script. Why not? While we're here, let's give a shout out to the Sherpas and porters, without whom these early treks especially would not have been possible. While the name Sherpa probably makes you think it means some Himalayan mountain guide helps you carry your stuff, it means people from the east. Sherpas are actually an ethnic group who originated in Tibet but are now mostly found in Nepal and live high up in the Himalayas. According to an article on CNN Travel, an American study in 1976 concluded that Sherpas had undergone genetic adaptations after living at one of the world's highest regions for thousands of years. This gave them an advantage when in high altitudes with low oxygen. Adaptations include unique hemoglobin-binding enzymes, doubled nitric oxide production. Great if I knew what nitric oxide was. Wait, no, that's nitrous oxide, the stuff that makes cars go fast. Hearts that can utilize glucose, and lungs with an increased efficiency in low oxygen conditions. What is cool about this? It's like, sure, if you go live at high altitude, your body's gonna get adapted to it or whatever. But these are genetic adaptations, which is cool. That's evolution in action, everybody. These days, many Sherpas are involved in helping groups climb Everest or other mountains in the range. As specialists, they organize the portering accommodations along the way, and then, at higher altitudes or more dangerous areas, they will go ahead and set up camps, ropes, ladders, or just assess the conditions. Without experienced Sherpas as guides, many Everest hopefuls would fall at the first hurdle. That's not to say that Sherpas themselves are immune from death. Nepalese people currently account for 124 of the recorded deaths on Everest, which is over a third. The next highest nationality is India, with 24 deaths. In the early days of mountain exploration, Sherpas and porters were often treated badly and seen as expendable, and were sometimes left to die or fend for themselves if things went pear-shaped for them on a climb. Which, I don't know, I like that we live in a bit more of a, I don't know what the right word for it is, evolved society or something, because treating people like this is just f***ing bad. It's just, that's it. It's just bad. And I like to think that if I was back in the day, I'd be I'd not treat people like that. But oh my God, everyone did. It's really fucking bad. I must say, having spent a few days doing the Halambu trek many moons ago, no idea what that is, a guide at least is essential. This was more of a hiking route than a mountaineering one, but I wanted to spend my time taking in the scenery, not trying to work out if I'm going the right way. I still need to use my sat-nav in my own neighborhood, so forget about trying to figure something like this out. Oh my God, me too. I used to live in this neighborhood, which has, it's almost like a block structure. So, things are on blocks. But the key word there is almost, because the blocks are slightly at angles, and so it's just not quite right. And even after living in this neighborhood for 5 years, I'd still be like, oh, which turn goes to that restaurant that I like? It's absurd. If I recall, my family had one guide and 2 porters, but for some reason I still had to carry my own massive rucksack, so I don't know what those other 2 guys were doing. Okay, I just checked with my family, and the porters we had carried my parents' large bag so that my sister and I experienced the full trekking thing. I'll do the same. I'll be like, Romulus, Remus, my children, put your packs on. Like, Dad, why aren't you wearing a pack? It's like, I'm on a bad back, My kids love being turned upside down lately. They're like, Dad, turn me upside down. I'm like, I hurt my back in the gym, Absolutely didn't hurt my back in the gym, although ironically I did last week. But generally I just say that. And they're like, "Aw." Not that I don't ever turn them upside down. I often do. Sorry, let's carry on. Would I have been pushing for this? Probably not, but I wasn't the one paying or making the decisions, so I carried my own bag. I was 19 at the time, and because I was away at university, had neglected to get any kind of trekking holiday shape for the expedition. Still, I did manage it, and the porters only had to carry my bag once at the end of a very long day. According to my family again, as I have little recollection of this, at one point the porters were literally running past us poor Western saps, carrying two full-size rucksacks apiece. This would also have been done in knockoff brown shoes and fueled by nothing more than vegetable curry and hot lemon drinks. Yeah, but I mean, this is what those dudes do every day. Like, they gotta be absolute beasts at this. Sherpas do hold most of the records when it comes to summiting Everest. For example, Kamirita has successfully climbed it 30 times, and Angrita did it 10 times without supplemental oxygen. So yes, Sherpas, respect. George Mallory in the path to Everest. Even if you don't know anything about mountaineering or much about Everest, you could probably pick the correct answer in the multiple choice question about who officially summited Everest first. You may not, I wouldn't even need multiple choice. I can answer that. Except I'd call him Norway or whatever. You may not, however, know anything else about George Mallory and his climbing partner, Sandy Irving. So let's remedy that situation right now. George Mallory seems to have been one of those annoying people who was effortlessly intelligent, entertaining, good-looking, and athletic. That bastard. He was also, even more annoyingly, extremely popular and a jolly good fellow to have around. He even appears to have swung both ways, at least before he got married, giving all sides a fair crack at the Mallory magic. Yes! He got into mountaineering at about the age of 18 when he went on a trip to the Alps in 1904, which included summiting Mont Blanc, Western Europe's highest peak. For comparison, the top of Mont Blanc is 4,804 meters above sea level, or about 15,764 feet. Everest is 8,850 meters above sea level. Mallory made several trips to the Alps and also clambered all over Ben Nevis in Scotland, Snowdonia in Wales, and created a new route up Pillar Rock in England's Lake District. Like, to put Ben Nevis and Snowdonia in the same paragraph as Mont Blanc and Everest is like, I climbed Snowdonia in half a morning. It's like, mate, unless I misremember, it's 2 hours up to the top. There's a train this is Snowdonia, right? There's a steam train that goes to the top of the mountain. It's not that high. Mallory became a teacher and got married in 1914 to Christina Ruth Turner, also known as Ruth, and the pair had 3 children. You might have noticed that 1914 was the beginning of the First World War, and Mallory did indeed go off to fight and was in the Battle of the Somme in 1916. He served several roles over the course of the war and made it up to the rank of lieutenant before eventually making it back home in 1919 and returning to teaching. Did people really spend so long at war? Did he really go off to war for 5 years? That sucks, bro. Fuck war, man. I don't want to have to go to war. I'm really glad there's no war. I'm really glad there's no wars. Meanwhile, lots of wars rage. But I'm not being conscripted into some sort of European theater of war yet. Having explored the great outdoors in the pre-war years and then landing headfirst into a global conflict, Mallory had a bit of an itch that going back to teaching just could not scratch. Enter the Mount Everest Committee, which was set up in 1921. Thanks to his climbing experience, his personal links with the mountaineering community, and the aforementioned demigod status among his peers, Mallory was personally invited to go on the first expedition, which would be a reconnaissance trip to work out the best way to summit, which would then be attempted in a separate expedition the next year in 1922. Given the circumstances, you'd think he'd jump at the chance, but given that he'd have to be away from his young family for months, Mallory wasn't actually all that up for it at first. He's also like, dude, I went off for war for 5 years. What the f? He also didn't have much faith in the first expedition and that it would chart a course to the summit, but his colleagues and wife persuaded him that he couldn't miss out on a potential history-making trip and that he absolutely had to do it. So he did. Mallory's wife's like, yo, Mallory, no, you should definitely go off for like months. I won't miss you, Mals. The first expedition set off from Darjeeling in India in May 1921. They weren't exactly travelling light, and the party included 100 mules, as well as a large contingent of porters, Sherpas, and Bhutas, another ethnic Tibetan group. At this point in history, the expedition was not allowed to access the Himalayas via Nepal, as Nepal was basically giving foreigners the finger, so they had to approach from the Tibetan side. And note to self, if you want to climb Everest, maybe meet up a bit nearer. They had to march 300 miles or 482 kilometers before they even got there. Well, I imagine because there wasn't like infrastructure to get them there, no? It's not like they were like, you know what we should do? Walk 1,000 kilometers instead of taking the train. I'm guessing there probably wasn't a train? During this time, one of the two experienced British mountaineers died, the other got sick and had to go back, and Mallory and the expedition leader were getting right on each other's nerves. Such auspicious beginnings. Mallory took photos of Everest and did do some climbing to scope out potential routes, but the terrain was very different to his experiences with alpine mountaineering, with lots of precarious glacial columns that they had to keep turning back. It also turned out that Mallory wasn't amazing at everything, as none of his photos had come out because he put the plates in the wrong way round. Luckily, they'd been developed, or not really developed, because they were blank before the expedition moved on, so he had a couple of days to feverishly race about retaking them. The team was also doing lots of geological, botanical, and geographical surveying of the whole valley area, providing new and updated detailed maps of the region. Mallory and the other team members sketched out plans for where they were to set up their intermediate resting camps on the mountain for a future summit attempt, and the expedition team made it back to Darjeeling on the 25th of October, so the whole thing had taken about 5 months. We should note that supplemental oxygen cylinders for higher altitudes were not taken on this trip. The weather in the higher reaches of the Himalayas was unpredictable and often potentially deadly, so some of their route ideas and camp locations were theoretical, as conditions often made it impossible for progress to be made in the time windows they had. It's also quite funny, although quite poignant, to read about what the mountaineers of 1921 were equipped for a joint jaunt up Everest. We now know, from the cozy comfort of our various homes, that Everest is a pretty cold place, so you're going to want to bundle up, but also be able to move easily and not be too weighed down. Yeah, like, as much as it's like these adventures and stuff, I'm pretty happy that I'm just in my nicely warm studio recording this episode rather than like halfway up Everest freezing my butt to death in a tent while I'm trying to boil water that's not really boiling because you're too high up and you're just miserable. And it's like, sure, climbing Everest is great and all that, congratulations. But it also sounds like it's one of those things that you'll be like, yeah, I'm glad I did it. But while you're doing it, you'll be like, f this, man, f this. Is that just me? It's like, I hate the when I'm doing it when it's hard, but then when I've done it, I'm like, yeah. Like, I did that. It's obviously not at all equivalent to climbing Everest, but I did that giant cycle route from the southernmost point of England to the northernmost point of Scotland. And there were some days where you're just like, oh, f me. This is so horrible. My legs hurt, my ass hurts, my whole body hurts. And I did it on the most inappropriate bike. It was just not a bike for long distance road biking. And it was just fucking miserable. Glad I did it? Yes. Would I do it again? Actually, yes. Was I miserable doing it? Yes. Luckily, these days, there are plenty of options to choose from when it comes to extreme cold weather mountain climbing apparel, and also we have the testimonies of all those who've come before, so we know what's a good idea and what isn't. The reconnaissance party of 1921 didn't really have any clue as to the conditions they'd face, and the seasoned climbers among them just thought the Himalayas would be a tad more strenuous than their alpine climbs. For a quick reminder, the highest peak in the Alps, Mont Blanc, is about half the height of Everest. Yeah, and that's not one of those things where it's like, oh, you can climb Mont Blanc twice, and that's like climbing Everest. I'm sure it gets exponentially harder the higher up you get, given that there's, much less oxygen in the air. There's a photo of the climbing team, including Mallory, and while they've hopefully got long johns on or something underneath, they're basically all wearing a shirt, a jumper, and a tweed suit. Oh my god, I got the picture here. They are. With long woolly socks. The expedition leader, Charles Howard Bury, is also rocking a waistcoat and a fancy watch chain, and at least 3 of the group sported gentlemanly hats as opposed to more practical hats that might help keep their heads warm, although I don't know if they kept them on the whole time. Their boots were leather, hobnailed things, not particularly flexible or lightweight. Nobody seeing this photo would have any idea that these men, at least one of whom looks like he's gunning for the front cover of GQ. Yes, that dude with the tie, he's got his hands in his waistcoat, he's got like his hat cocked to one side. Oh, that's brilliant. And he's off to climb Everest. He's wearing a tie. We're standing in one of the least hospitable places on Earth. Indeed, the playwright George Bernard Shaw commented that the group looked like a Connemara picnic surprised in a snowstorm. Connemara being a scenic natural area of Ireland, with its highest peak, Ben Bourne, reaching 730 metres, or 500 Danny DeVitos in height. Just to let you know, there wasn't a sudden leap forward in climbing gear between this expedition and the first real summit attempt the following year, with one exception. According to UKClimbing.com, George Finch, a chemist and mountaineer who went on the 1922 trip, quote, commissioned a special jacket and set of pants made from parachute silk and goose down. That is smart. Goose down is still used in like four-season sleeping bags, like those ones that are designed to go real cold. And I was like, goose down? Don't we have some sort of like magical sciencey feather, or whatever that we can use now? And it's like, no, the artificial ones, like made with polyester, I don't even know. They're never quite as good. At least, look, I don't really know a lot about camping, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. The quote continues, the prototypical modern climbing suit. The other climbers laughed at him initially until they saw how much warmer and more comfortable he was when facing storms on the Tibetan plain. Well, he didn't want to share. He wasn't like, this could be a good idea, boys. He's just like, guess what I got, boys? Guess what you don't, you tie-wearing idiot. As for climbing gear, you know, all the harnesses, ice screws, and belts and loops and axes and whatnot, they didn't really have much of that in the 1920s. They used ropes, pegs, and long wooden-handled ice axes, but not much else. This was mostly because extreme mountaineering like this wasn't a popular pastime, so there was no knowledge of what specialist equipment might be necessary, and even if there was, the equipment might not even exist yet. Let's also have a quick word about supplemental oxygen. There are, of course, hardcore climbers who want to get to the summit without the aid of extra oxygen, and while it's possible, hardly anyone's done it. According to Alan Arnett in a piece called Everest by the Numbers 2025 edition, quote, it's rare to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. Only 230 people have ever done so, a scant 1.8% of the total summit since 1953. Holy shit, that's more. That seems like it's much more challenging, which isn't a surprise because, you know, we need oxygen for like breathing and so there you go. Of course, in the pioneer days of the 1920s, taking oxygen up with you not only meant lugging the heavy canisters and tubes around, but there was also the matter of if they'd even work, and, of course, the principle of the thing. As per UKClimbing.com again, quoting, prior to leaving for Tibet, the climbing team and the expedition's organizers spent a lot of time arguing about the ethics of using oxygen. Mallory famously described it as damnable heresy, rejecting oxygen on sporting and aesthetic grounds. He's like, I don't like the look. Others, the quote continues, others were wary for more practical considerations, distrusting the technology and worrying that the benefits of oxygen were outweighed by the weight of the primitive sets then available. I mean, fair play. Also, how much better can oxygen technology get? We're just compressing it harder into like more solid bottles or something? Let's just go back to George Finch for a second. He of the commissioned parachute pants. He and his climbing partner, Captain Jeffrey Bruce, used supplemental oxygen or bottled oxygen and made it to 8,321 meters or 27,300 feet up Everest in the 1922 expedition, a world record climb at the time, and only about 500 meters shy of the summit. That sounds real close, but they were so exhausted they had to go back down to a camp to recuperate. And that's the thing with such high altitude. You really do have to keep going up and down to get used to it. Apparently, Mallory was quietly confident that he could best Everest even in the initial 1921 exploratory visit, but it soon became clear after 3 attempts by different groups in the 1922 expedition that it was going to be a bit harder than they thought. That's some proper confidence, isn't it? It's like, no, biggest mountain in the world? Climbed something about half the height before. Okay, crack that out in an afternoon. Mallory was part of the first and third attempt, both of which almost ended in disaster. In his first attempt, 4 climbers were roped together and were descending part of the North Ridge when one of them slipped and could have potentially dragged all 4 men to their deaths had Mallory not managed to quickly whack his pickaxe into a good position and loop the rope around it, stopping everyone short. Oh my god, that is like spine-chilling. It's just, he throws his dead. God damn, just the idea that one axe in like some ice or whatever is holding like 4 dudes, you'd just be like, guys? The second attempt was Finch and Bruce's record, which edged out Mallory's. In the third and final attempt of this 1922 trip, Mallory, 2 climbers, and a group of 14 porters were caught in an avalanche, which resulted in the deaths of 7 of the porters. After this tragedy, the second expedition wrapped up. I'm surprised. Surprised they're not just like, oh, who died? The porters. No, I asked who died. The porters aren't people. Between Everest trips, Mallory was giving talks about his adventures and contributing to books about the previous expeditions. It was also during this period that, when asked about why he wanted to climb Everest, he gave the famous answer, because it's there. That's gangster, to be honest. You can read this as a comment on the human desire to conquer the planet, his individual drive to get to the top of this thing, or just as a flippant, slightly annoyed response, because he'd probably been asked this question a million times. Either way, it's awesome. He also received an Olympic gold medal for men's alpinism in the 1924 Chamonix Winter Olympics for being part of the then world record-breaking Everest climb. Unfortunately, I didn't realize you could get Olympic medals outside of the Olympics. Unfortunately, the touring circuit wasn't particularly lucrative for him, and he managed to get another job as a lecturer, but it wasn't long before the next expedition was being organized, and Mallory was invited to be a part of it once more. Mallory's last climb. The 1924 expedition kicked off in February 1924 and consists of a team of 12, being either mountaineers, scientists, doctors, photographers, interpreters, or a combination of these things, and 60 local porters. Again, 3 summit attempts were made, with Mallory participating in the first and third. He was, again, bullish about his chances of making it, and he had a photo of his wife, Ruth, with him, which he intended to leave at the summit. Ooh, is that what they find? Like, when he gets up there, they find this picture of Ruth? And then they find his, did they find that later? Is that possible? I mean, surely it would have degraded over, especially if this is recent evidence. Mallory's first attempt started on the 1st of June 1924, but because of terrible conditions, their porters refused to climb higher with any equipment to make it to camp number 5, so they had to descend back down to camp number 4. The second pair to make an attempt was Edward Norton, who I believe is different. I'm like, wait, Edward Norton? Who I believe is a different person to the actor, and Theodore Somerville. This attempt came agonizingly close to the summit, reaching 8,572.8 meters, or 28,126 feet, another record at the time. They'd basically made it up 29/30ths of Everest from the North Ridge, only 280 meters or a mere 200 Danny DeVitos from the summit. But those, as we've discussed, are the hardest Danny DeVitos to summit. They had done this with no supplemental oxygen, and had also started a bit later than originally planned. Light's a major point to factor in when doing something like this, because you also have to make sure that you give yourself enough time to be able to get down to the campsite before it's dark. Anyway, they were dehydrated and exhausted, and the time window was shrinking rapidly, so they had to abandon that attempt. Somerville almost died because his throat suddenly got blocked up, and he basically had to give himself the Heimlich maneuver to be able to dislodge whatever it was. Wait, what's his throat get blocked up with? It's just like chewing on some sweets? I guess he could be, right? For the energy. When they descended back down to camp number 4, Norton got snowblind as he'd taken off his goggles and had to be carried down by a group of porters. He couldn't see anything for almost 3 days, but eventually recovered. Gotta be a terrifying 3 days. Am I gonna be able to see again? I hope so. On the 6th of June 1924, Mallory, who was 37, same age as me right now, made what turned out to be his final bid to reach the top of the world. This time, his partner was 22-year-old Andrew Irvine, known as Sandy. Mallory had come around to the positives of using supplemental or bottled oxygen by this point, and Irving was technically handy at using it and had even rebuilt the whole setup during the 1924 expedition to make it less cumbersome and nicer. Irving was at Oxford studying chemistry and was also on the rowing team, having beaten Cambridge the year previously in 1923. Sounds like another annoyingly smart and athletic person. Unsurprisingly, the two got on well, so Mallory thought that as a pair they'd have a good shot. We know what happened on their attempt up to a certain point, but beyond that, it's a mystery that has endured to this day. Not helping the physical attempts or the answer to this mystery was the communication aspect. Nowadays, you can remain in touch with other team members, even if you're spread over several camps, and people at base camp, for example, could easily contact anyone in the wider world. Actually, I just looked into it, and people have made calls from the top of Everest, albeit probably not with their usual network carrier. No, I mean, that doesn't seem like technologically impossible. Imagine a sat phone would work on top of Everest just as well as it does anywhere else that's outside. Probably would work great on Everest. You're closer to the satellites, aren't you? In the 1920s, The only method to transmit message on Everest was literally writing them down and either leaving them at camp for the next person to read whenever they should arrive, or handing them from person to person until the message reached an area where the carrier could travel a bit faster to the nearest town with a post office or telegraph station, which was many, many miles away. Yeah, when people say like the world's so small nowadays, it does feel tangible, doesn't it? Like back in the day, it'd be like, oh, you want to get a message around the world? It's like, oh, it's going to take months. And now it's like you could basically reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Just like that. It was therefore not possible to warn anyone of impeding conditions changes or relay any kind of emergency information at all. You were basically on your own, and you and your teammates would just have to rely on you turning back at some point to confirm the fact that you were still all right. Actually, I tell a slight lie, as there was some visual messaging the team had worked out, which we'll mention later, but let's just say that it was primitive. They're just like waving some flags around like that. Mallory and Irving struck out from camp number 4 for their summit attempt, along with 8 porters who were carrying the oxygen bottles and food. Mallory had also borrowed a Kodak Vest pocket camera from fellow climber Somerville to take some pictures from the top, should they get there. The group made it to camp number 5, and half the porters returned to camp number 4 with a note from Mallory saying that the weather looked good and things looked hopeful. I got a picture here. It is cool. Like, there's pictures from people climbing Everest in like the 1920s. It's like 100 years ago. There's a photograph. That was an actual moment in time. And everyone in that photo is now dead. I mean, obviously, they're the guys who died climbing Everest. But I mean, even if they'd survived and lived to really old age, they'd still be dead. The next day, June the 7th, Noel Odell, who was a geologist, a member of the climbing team, went up to camp number 5 with a porter. When he got there, the remaining 4 porters, who'd gone with Irving and Mallory, came back down with a couple of notes from Mallory. One of them was addressed to Odell and said that Mallory and Irving had left their compass in the camp by mistake and they'd probably be using 2 cylinders of oxygen each for their final push the next day, although, quote, it's a bloody load for climbing. 2 cylinders would probably weigh about 16 pounds or 7.25 kilos. That's not too bad, is it? They were strapped onto the climbers' backs in a frame harness, as seen in the last photo of Mallory and Irving, which was taken by Odell the previous day. Mallory also said in his note that it was perfect weather for the job, so you can imagine that hopes were high that this would finally be it. The final note he wrote was addressed to John Knoll, the photographer and cinematographer for the trip, and it said, "Dear Knoll, we'll probably start early tomorrow, the 8th, to have clear weather. It won't be too early to start looking out for us, either crossing the rock band under the pyramid or going up the skyline at 8 p.m. End quote. He had pointedly signed both his notes, yours ever, G. Mallory. He actually meant 8 a.m., not p.m. on his note, as that would be way too late for summiting Everest, but everyone knew what he meant. This is the last definite thing we know about the 2 climbers. John Knoll had taken the actual last image of the pair the day after Odell took his photo. Knoll took a short film of Mallory, Irvine, and the 4 Sherpas, and there's film! Not just like pictures, there's film. I know people are like, yes, Simon, we know there was filming. There's pictures from the 19th century. It's still cool, okay? Still cool. And the 4 Sherpas who were standing with them, walking across a relatively flat area of the North Ridge. Knoll guessed he was around 2 miles away from the group, i.e. 2 miles across from them, not 2 miles below, so the figures are very small, but they're definitely people walking along. Back to the 8th of June, John Knoll set up his camera to focus on the pyramid area that Mallory had mentioned, which they'd both talked about previously, so Knoll knew where it was. Unfortunately, after a couple of hours checking the mountainside with a telescope, the climbers were not spotted before the area became obscured by cloud. The last confirmed sighting of the pair was by Noel Odell, the mountaineering geologist who had climbed up to camp number 6 to do some geological stuff and also to help Mallory and Irving when they descended. Here's his account for the final sighting. At 12:50, just after I'd emerged from a state of jubilation at finding the first definite fossils on Everest, there was a sudden clearing of the atmosphere, and the entire summit ridge and final peak of Everest were unveiled. My eyes became fixed on one tiny black spot silhouetted on a small snow crest beneath a rock step in the ridge. The black spot moved. Another black spot became apparent and moved up the snow to join the other on the crest. The first then approached the great rock step and shortly emerged at the top. The second did likewise. Then the whole fascinating vision vanished, enveloped in cloud once more. Odell thought that the climbers were on the second step of the final pyramid climb to the summit, meaning that they were just 800 feet or 240 meters away from their goal. That's only 150 Danny DeVitos, the smallest number yet. They had also been quoted as saying they were going strong for the top, and he eagerly awaited their return at camp number 6. Unfortunately, bad weather rolled in, and as time dragged on, Odell couldn't wait at camp number 6 anymore for them, and the tent there could only fit 2 people in it, so he had to descend to a lower camp. Over the next day or so, Odell returned to camps 5 and 6, but he didn't see any signs of Mallory and Irving. Eventually, on the 10th of June, Odell knew that there was no hope of the men returning alive, and he used the prearranged sign of 6 blankets in a cross formation on the snow to signal to other members of the party that Mallory and Irving were lost, and there was no hope. On the 11th of June, the 1924 expedition started to leave the mountain, minus 2 of its brightest stars. Both Mallory and Irving have commemorative plaques, windows, and various things named after them, so their memory continues. They have a peak named after them in California's Sierra Nevada mountains, and their legend endured precisely because their bodies were not recovered. People who die on Everest are usually not recovered because they've either fallen into an inaccessible area, or it's just too dangerous or difficult for other party members to bring them down, or for helicopters to reach them. There are currently around 200 bodies still on the mountain, which lends me to my favorite phrase to make myself feel better about being lazy. Every dead body on Everest was once a highly motivated person. It's true. It's true. Like, as much as I complain about doing, that cycle ride and stuff, but for me, the after thing is worth it. Like, I don't know. Now I got kids and stuff, and probably Everest is a bit dangerous for me. But maybe when I'm a bit older and the kids are older and out of the house and stuff, maybe I'd give it a crack. My wife will probably be like, "No, you don't." But I'm probably, one of these highly motivated people who'd be up for that. Be like, let's go. Because everyone knew that Mallory and Irving were still up there somewhere. If they were found, it could help determine whether or not they did actually make it to the top. In a piece for TheIndependent.com, Mallory, the Everest Enigma, Ed Douglas says, quote, "But that last tantalizing glimpse of him and the sheer courage of what those early climbers attempted in their gabardine coats and wool sweaters, their hobnailed boots and feeble ropes, meant that Mallory's story survived." Everest in place. What happened to Mallory and Irving? People have, of course, tried to find Mallory and Irving over the years, but there was no news until a clue was found in 1933. A climbing party found Sandy Irvin's ice axe lying on a slab underneath the first step of the final ascent. They assumed that Irving had slipped to his death from this area. God, pretty intense if they found them up there, living in a cave. Oh, we're finally rescued. The big break... a bit crass. They died climbing a mountain, I apologize. The big break in the case didn't happen until as late as 1999. Although the story really starts in 1975. A Chinese mountaineering party was camped at about 26,800 feet on the north face of Everest, and one of the party, Wang Huaobao, reported seeing what he called English dead. It was lucky that he mentioned this to someone else, as he was killed soon after in an avalanche, and that was all the information anyone had. The story didn't really catch hold among the mountaineering community, as other members of the party said that they hadn't seen anything and they were together at all times. It turned out, however, that Wang Hongbao had gone off for a short wander by himself from the high camp, so it was... He's like, "No, I haven't had enough exercise today climbing up this mountain. I'm just going to go for a short walk. Weather's lovely out." Maniac, Wang, maniac. So it was possible he was the only person to spot something. If there was a body, it was definitely going to be Mallory or Irving, because no other Western climbers had reached that height on the North Face at that time. In 1999, a group was formed called the Mallory and Irving Research Expedition. They wanted to find the bodies of the climbers to ascertain whether or not they'd made the summit. One of the key pieces of evidence to answer this question would be the Kodak camera Mallory was known to have in his possession. Bro, I'm sorry, but it's 70 years later. Can film possibly survive that long? It was unclear whether Irving also had a camera, but he was interested in photography, so there might have been a second one. It was widely assumed that Irving would actually be carrying the Kodak, as Mallory would have been the climb leader, and so any unnecessary weight or bulk for him could be given to Irving to carry. Taking the mention of the English dead as true, the team mapped out an area of the mountain where they thought the body could be, which was an area about 20 minutes plausible travel in all directions from where the Chinese had made their camp in 1975. After trekking up to camp number 6, it only took about an hour for the team to find the body at an elevation of 26,760 feet, or 8,156 meters. Because the ice axe found in 1933 had belonged to him, everyone was assuming that this was Sandy Irving. The team was in constant communication with each other and the team leader back at base camp, and initially they used codes like Snickers and T for the body, as they didn't want anybody else climbing Everest at the time to know what they'd found. This was for several reasons. They wanted to work undisturbed, they didn't want anyone taking risks to try and have a look, and as the body had lain in peace for 75 years, they wanted it to be treated respectfully. If anyone had overheard, they could inform the rest of the world in a matter of minutes. The body was well preserved thanks to cold temperatures, although birds had done some damage to the backside of it. There was a rope around the waist with a frayed end. Oh my god, birds are flying up that high? Holy shit, birds? Damn! The team could tell from markings on the skin that there'd been a great pull on the body from the rope. The right leg was broken and the body was lying face down with its arms out as though to stop a fall. The right boot was intact, but there were only small pieces of the left. The team also noticed damage to the shoulder blade. It was only when checking the clothing in more detail that the team realized they weren't looking at Irving at all. They found several clothing tags with Mallory's name on them, and while it's conceivable that Irving would have been wearing Mallory's clothes, they also found various personal items of Mallory's with his initials on them and letters addressed to him. Wait, didn't he say the body was really well preserved? Don't they know what he looks like? Just look at his face. You know, that's Mallory's. There he is. Maybe the birds f***ed up his face as well or something. They also found such essentials for a climb up the world's highest mountains as a tin of Brand & Co. savory meat lozenges. Ugh. 3 monogrammed handkerchiefs, and a bill from a department store. What they didn't find was a camera, and they speculated that maybe he'd been carrying a rucksack that wasn't with the body now. This is plausible, as no oxygen tanks were found either, and we know Mallory was carrying at least 2 on his back. By the way, they weren't just rifling through his pockets, the body was still frozen into the mountainside, so it took ages to chip around it and get any pockets open. There was significant trauma to the ribs found, meaning that Mallory had probably slammed into the mountain while attached to the rope. The team surmised that Mallory and Irving had been roped together. There was a subsequent search with a metal detector and more excavation of Mallory's body, which uncovered evidence of severe head injury. After this search, Mallory was reburied under some rocks with a short ceremony. So, what of Andrew Sandy Irving? If he wasn't where researchers assumed he was, where could he have lain all this time? There hadn't been any other plausible sightings of what might have been his body, and the 1999 team didn't make any progress in finding his possible location. It wasn't until September 2024, 100 years and 2 months since his death, that Sandy Irving finally made his presence slightly known. That is extremely recently. It's early 2025 as I'm recording this. Early. It's like April. It still feels early somehow. A team filming for National Geographic were on the central Rongbuk Glacier under Everest's north face when they spotted a boot that had become visible in the thawing ice. It was clearly an old design and contained the remains of a foot and a long sock. When they took a closer look, there was a clothing label on the sock bearing the name A.C. Irving. Jimmy Chin, a photographer and filmmaker with the party, thought it likely that the boot had thawed out only a week or so before they found it. The team got permission to remove the boot from the mountain as ravens were seen pecking at it. Oh my god, ravens! I had no idea ravens could go so high up. And the remains were sent for DNA analysis, although this is probably moot, as Jimmy Chin says, I mean, dude, there's a label on it. Jimmy sounds like a ledge. At the time of writing, nothing further has been found. The National Geographic team haven't disclosed the exact location of where they found the boot to preserve any potential remains and to keep the trophy hunters at bay, but they're confident that this clue narrows the search area for Irving and potentially the camera, which could answer once and for all if the pair made it to the top, before what looks like they slipped or were swept to their deaths. I'm really skeptical. I mean, can film really last that long? I feel like if you had a camera in like a really nicely, just in a cold cupboard for 100 years, you'd open it up and try and develop the film and it would all not work. But maybe I'm underestimating film. I mean, I don't know. Did they make it? The argument for. Let's be honest, we want them to have made it right. Personally, I really do, so this section might be a bit more influenced by hope and emotion than the counter-arguments, but we're sticking to the facts, obviously. Here's the main reasons why people think Mallory and Irving were the first people to get to the top of Everest. And by the way, yes, I'd also like this to be true. I like it when history gets a little bit rewritten. It's kind of fun. 1. The last sighting by Noel, and it's also 25, 30 years before Edmund Hillary and Terzing Norgay did it. So that'd be cool. That's really cool. The last sighting by Noel O'Dell placed them very near the summit, and he said they were going strong and moving with considerable alacrity. From his initial description, it seemed that the pair were on what's known as the second step, which is very near the top. Jake Norton, who has summited Everest several times and was on the team that actually found Mallory's body, says on his website, if they were atop the second step at that time, it is almost unthinkable that they did not reach the summit. With all major challenges behind them, it would be smooth sailing from there to the top of the world. Number 2, the missing photograph. George Mallory was known to have a photo of his wife on him when he made his last climb, which he was going to leave at the top. When the research team found him in 1999, he had all kinds of odds and ends on him, but there was no photograph. Oh, that does feel like he made it though, doesn't it? This has led many people to believe that he did in fact manage to leave it at the top. As a previous almost summiter, it seems unlikely that Mallory would want to place it anywhere else. Number 3, or maybe when he was had his ribs crushed and his head bashed in, and he's having his leg pulled off by a rope. Maybe he takes out the picture of his wife to look at while he's dying, which is grim to think about, and then it blew away. Very possible. Number 3. When the Mallory and Irving research expedition searched his body, Mallory was also found to have a pair of snow goggles in one of his pockets. We know from the experience of Edward Norton, no relation to Jake who we just mentioned, that snow blindness could be extremely dangerous. Remember how he took his goggles off and became snowblind and couldn't see for nearly 3 days? There's no way Mallory would risk anything like that. The fact that the goggles were folded and deep in a pocket seems to suggest that they were on their way back down in lessening light when the accident happened. Number 4. The possibility of the camera. If Irving's body is ever found, it is hoped that the camera will be with it. Kodak said that there's a chance any film could still be recovered, and then we'll know for sure if Mallory and Irving were, in fact, the first to summit Everest. Until this crucial clue is found, it's unlikely that we'll ever solve this mystery for sure. Okay, Kodak, you making stuff to last, damn! Did they make it? The argument against. Okay, let's take a look at the counter-arguments in order. Odell's final sighting has not been conclusively proven to have been on the second step. In fact, Odell himself soon changed his mind and thought it more likely they were on the first step, putting them further from the summit and also at such time of day that the summit attempt was not really feasible. Would this have put them off if they were on the edge of the safe cut-off time but thought a push for the summit was within their grasp? We don't know that, but what we do know is that they weren't past the second step when Odell saw them. It wasn't actually like they could have made it up there anyway. As no one had yet attempted this route, Mallory and Irving would have been unprepared for the difficulty of free climbing this headwall given their lack of supplies. Everest wasn't officially summited via the north side until 1960 by a Chinese party. Researcher Gareth Thomas shares more information on this on his website. Quote, although they were delayed for 3 hours at the headwall of the second step, Porter Qiu Xinghua eventually climbed the step with the aid of a shoulder stand from one of his companions and a piton nailed into a crack in the rock. Hence the Chinese proved that the second step could be climbed, but only in extremis, since Q always required to remove his boots to get purchase on the rock and subsequently lost his toes and heel to frostbite. Jesus. He's like, how am I going to get up this wall? Better take my shoes off. It's not cold out. It's like, if it's anywhere even remotely cold out, my wife would be like, children, put on your shoes. And I'll be like, they're just going to pop out for a second. It's not that cold. And she'll be like, shoes. Winning it. What's going to happen? Frostbite? The quote continues, later attempts on the northeast ridge have made use of a metal ladder left by a subsequent Chinese expedition at this critical point. End quote. Mountaineer Conrad Anker, who was also part of the team that found Mallory's body, attempted to free climb this area in 1999, but did end up briefly stepping on the ladder, although he hypothesized that Mallory could have done that. He managed to do it for real in 2007, and other people have also managed in various weather conditions, so while this started as a point to say that it might have been too difficult for Mallory and Irving without any climbing aids, it's not 100% clear that they couldn't have done it. Yeah, but they were also working with equipment that was 80 years older than what these guys had, and experience, and it's obviously much easier today. This actually leads into a side theory that they didn't take this route at all, instead going off script and trying a route that's known as the couloir instead. You didn't just have to climb up, remember, you also had to get back down. If Mallory and Irving assessed the second step some distance before they reached it, which they would have, they might have decided it wasn't feasible and decided to go down the couloir route instead. This is actually not a bad theory, because Edward Norton had made his earlier world record climb by going along that route. He was too exhausted to continue and had to descend, but remember, he had not taken supplemental oxygen on his attempt. Mallory and Irving were all rigged up and good to go. Nobody had attempted the second step before. Norton had blazed something of a trail down a different route. Why would they have not given his route a whirl, confident that they could make it further with the help of the extra oxygen? If they had gone down on this other route, it might also explain why it took so long for Mallory to be found, because everyone was looking in the wrong place. Gareth D. Thomas posits that Mallory and Irving could have made it, then returned via the couloir instead, meaning that when Mallory fell, it would have been from a lower elevation than presumed, thus explaining why his body was found in a neat position where it looks like he tried to break his own fall, rather than all splayed out like it might have been if it landed from a greater height. On his website, Thomas says, quote, Mallory and Irving's descent along a lower route would explain this shorter fall. A return from the couloir is one of very few explanations for this scenario, and I believe the best. He also points out that very few climbers go from couloir to the summit, then back along Norton's route, so maybe any remaining clues would be found in that area somewhere. Everest mountaineer Jake Norton also shares the opinion on the condition of Mallory's body, saying on his website, quote, having seen other bodies, namely Sergei Artsentiev, who did fall from the ridge crest, there is such a stark difference in body posture, condition, damage/injury, etc., that it makes it very difficult for me to imagine Mallory falling from the ridge and ending up relatively intact. This is one of those mysteries, however, that can't currently be proven either way. No, but it does seem unlikely that he fell from such a great height. Given, he had some bad injuries, but more like, didn't we say probably slammed against a rock wall or something? Like, they don't seem like the kind of ruinous injuries that you'd get falling from a great height. What we do know is that O'Dell saw the pair at nearly 1 p.m. If they were at the first step, they were much too far behind to try a summit attempt, especially if they did go via the couloir, which is a longer route with terrain unknown to the pair past where Ed and Norton got to. Some researchers question whether Mallory would have chosen Norton's route, given that the snow conditions were bad when Norton had to turn around, and they were going up only a few days later. The location of O'Dell's sighting has been questioned, as his apparent vantage point doesn't line up perfectly with the view he said he had. He didn't take any pictures, so we can't cross-check accurately. He changed his mind about where the climbers must have been in pretty short order, so we can't say for sure where on the route they were, and therefore what options were open to them that late in the day. So let's get back to the other arguments. The photograph. Yes, Mallory said that he'd leave it at the summit and his team didn't find it on his body, which, in our hopes and dreams, points to him having indeed left it at the top of Everest. If we speculate logically, we can also say that maybe at some point he knew he wouldn't make it, so he either took the photo out to place it at their highest reach point or to say goodbye to his wife because he was sure he was going to die. Exactly. We cannot know for sure that he even had the photo in the first place, although he had a lot of other random paperwork on him. He had a department store receipt, dude. Like, if I'm climbing Everest, if I'm going to do any sort of activity, I'm always like, all right, let's make everything as light as possible. And insane as it is, I'd be like, yeah, I'll definitely throw away all the old receipts and all the junk. Because you're like, you don't need that. Just lighten up. Nobody has ever mentioned seeing the photo at the summit, but of course, if it was ever put up there, it likely would have blown away or rotted to nothing by now. Unfortunately, the absence of the photo on Mallory does not prove the presence of it on the summit, indeed. The snow goggles. These were found folded and unbroken in one of Mallory's inside pockets, the inference being that he hadn't needed them, so was therefore descending the mountain in worsening light. That Mallory was descending is not in doubt, but unfortunately we can't extrapolate this one detail to mean that they definitely made it to the top before coming back down. Yeah, he doesn't need to have made it to the top to come back down. Surprised I didn't figure that out first time around, but hey-ho. The camera. All hopes for the camera, and therefore possible proof of a successful summit, now lie with finding the remains of Andrew Irving. If he is ever found and the camera is still with him, the film will also need to be successfully recovered in order to see what's on it. That's a lot of ifs and buts, but the tantalizing possibility of it is what keeps the researchers going. Finding Irvin's boot might potentially narrow the search area, but over the course of the century since he died, thaws, freezes, and avalanches mean that the boot could have easily ended up quite away from the rest of his remains. Anecdotally, there have been a couple of possible sightings of his body over the decades, but all have been in different areas and none have been corroborated. Also, remember that conditions on Everest are quite dynamic, so even if a body is spotted on one expedition, heavy snow or a rockfall will make it totally invisible to another. Here's another strong argument against them reaching the top. At 2 p.m., when they would have been relatively close elevation-wise, a snowstorm hit the mountain. Mallory and Irving wouldn't have any warning about this, since there was no way of communicating with them at the time. Howard Somerville, one of the group's climbers, had taken barometric readings which showed a large drop in pressure at base camp, meaning terrible conditions for anyone at higher altitudes. Graham Hoylands, one of the team who found Mallory and himself a distant relative of Somerville, said in an interview with CNN, quote, "They were climbing into an absolute shitstorm, not only a blizzard, but a sort of snow bomb." The article goes on, Hoyland has experienced snow bombs himself on Everest. It's terrifying. The temperature drops hugely. You're gasping for breath. There are winds of 100 knots. One guy I know was blown off the mountain and ended up further up the mountain. God damn, that's a lot of wind. He said, effectively, the drop in air pressure meant that the mountain suddenly became higher, around 650 feet higher to be precise. Hoyland calls it an invisible death trap. He also points out that the clothes the pair were wearing would not have been very effective against such cold weather. After hoping that the mountaineering pioneers had managed to succeed, Hoyland has since concluded, unfortunately, when you read the facts, and they're different, you have to change your mind. You can't carry on being a wishful thinker. In his last letter to his wife, dated the 27th of May, 1924, Mallory also notes that he's not exactly in fighting form. He starts off saying, "Dear girl, this has been a bad time altogether." He then recounts a near-death experience he had while slipping into a crevice and somehow managed to save himself with his ice axe while below was a very unpleasant black hole. No one could hear him shouting, but he eventually managed to get back on track, but, quote, "cutting against time at the end after such a day just about brought me to my limit." He goes on, "My one personal trouble has been a cough. It started a day or two before leaving the base camp, but I thought nothing of it. In the high camp, it has been the devil. Even after the day's exercise I have described, I couldn't sleep, but was distressed with bursts of coughing fit to tear one's guts, and so headache and misery altogether. Besides which, of course, it has a very bad effect on one's going on the mountain. Somerville also has a cough, which started a little later than mine, and he has not been at his physical best." End quote. Indeed, we mentioned Somerville nearly dying from a constricted throat earlier. He's quoted as saying, "We were unroped and Norton was ahead, and I couldn't breathe, in or out, so I sat down in the snow and made violent efforts to cough. But I couldn't, and I thought, oh well, this is the end. Cheerio, everybody." It's the most British that I've ever heard in my life. It's like, oh look, I'm on the mountain and I can't breathe. Cheerio, chaps. Carry on without me. See you in heaven. Pip, pip. And I remembered my medical training, that most of our breathing is done with the diaphragm, and so I gave one huge cough and at the same time pressed hard with my hands on my tummy. That did the trick. Up came a horrible black slough, which I think was the inside of my larynx. Ah! Dude! Intense pain, but complete relief. It hurt like hell, but it was air in sufficient quantity to keep me alive. If only it had happened higher up, we might both have gone on very much further. Dude coughed up his larynx. I mean, I guess he didn't, because I don't think you can cough up your larynx, but god damn, that's gross. Incidentally, Somerville thought it quite possible that Mallory and Irving did make it to the top. Anyway, Mallory was in bad health at the start of his final attempt and says, "The physique of the whole party has gone down, sadly. The only chance now is to get fit and go for a simpler, quicker plan, but I'm quite doubtful if I shall be fit enough." At the end of his last letter, he writes, "It is 50-1 against us, but we'll have a whack yet and do ourselves proud." Unfortunately, the tally marks on the against side of the argument are starting to add up more and more. I don't want to do Mallory a disservice by saying I don't think he could have made it, but when you factor in the snowstorm, the unknown territory of the final stretch, and his under-par health, it does seem less and less likely. Conrad Anker, who discovered Mallory's body in 1999, has concluded that it's, quote, "possible but highly improbable that they made it to the top." Yep, I think right now I absolutely agree with old Conrad there. Possible, highly improbable, and definitely no proof yet. If there is proof, fantastic, I'll change my mind. Mallory's son John was only 3 when his dad died. He publicly stated his view as, "To me, the only way you achieve a summit is to come back alive. The job is only half done if you don't get down." This seems a bit harsh to me, but I guess he probably has deep-rooted abandonment issues, and maybe it wasn't meant as coldly as it appears in print. I imagine not, but it does read that way, doesn't it? It's like, what a dick. I grew up without a dad because he went off climbing Everest like an idiot. Didn't even make it. Coward! Another mystery. Everyone hopes, it seems, still rely on finding that camera, and that leads us to the other mystery involving the bodies. Rumor has it Mallory's is no longer where the expedition team found it and subsequently buried it. Rumor has it that Irving was located a while ago and has also since been removed from the mountain. What's going on here? Well, Jamie McGinnis, a man who has climbed Everest 6 times, has been on the lookout for the historic duo, and he thinks that Mallory and even Irving were removed sometime in the early 2000s. By the way, just 6 times climbing Everest? Other than the physical achievement of that, climbing Everest's enormously expensive, tens of thousands of dollars expensive. I think it's $40,000 just for the permit to go up there. So this dude spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just climbing Everest over and over again. Bro, just get a job as a porter. In an article on The Guardian's website, McGinnis says, Irving's body is almost certainly no longer up there. We gave it a good search with drones, and we spotted several other bodies, so we know we weren't missing anything of the right size. Fellow climber Mark Sinnott says that they'd gone back to exactly where Mallory should have been. As per the Guardian article by Ed Douglas, quoting again, "We had GPS coordinates where the body was," Sinnott said. "We flew the drone to that spot. We took photos. I looked at the photos really carefully with Tom Pollard, who had been there in 1999. Pollard was the last of the American team to leave the body and told Sinnott that one of Mallory's legs was still clearly visible. I feel if Mallory's body was still there, we would have seen it. It doesn't make any sense. Why remove the body? Also, why not bury the body properly? Didn't they say they buried it under rocks? Just left one leg sticking out? I'm not 100% convinced that Mallory has been moved, though. Sinnott didn't physically revisit the site. He was looking at drone photos, which isn't the same as being able to move rocks aside with your hands to see if something's underneath. If Mallory's leg was visible, that would mean it was probably open to the elements, scavenging birds, etc. Therefore, it could have been bleached of color, covered in snow, covered in rocks, or lots of other things. There would be no real reason to move him now anyway, as no evidence of a successful summit was found on his body. In 2012, McGuinness was at base camp and asked a China-Tibet Mountaineering Association official if they'd removed Irving's body from the mountain in the run-up to the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Okay, according to McGuinness, the official replied somewhat horrifyingly, it was thrown off the mountain a lot earlier than that. Alright, but what could be the reason for something like that? If it's true, Ed Douglas writes that, quote, it's more likely connected to long-standing sensitivities in China about the skeptical Western reaction to China's ascent of the mountain more than 60 years ago. What he's talking about is that the Chinese group was officially the first to summit Everest via the North Route in 1960. Remember the guy who had to take off his boot and lost a heel? If Irving's body was found and there was evidence or potential evidence that he and Mallory had actually made it 36 years earlier, that might be enough of a reason to quietly remove said evidence. Well, thrown off the mountain might have been used for dramatic effect. There are several researchers into Mallory and Irving's climb who do think that Irving probably has been removed, or at least moved from a location where he might have been seen more easily. The thing is that boot that was found just last year in 2024. Does this mean that the rest of Irving is still up there, or was it already detached from his body when the rest of it was taken off the mountain? There are different schools of thoughts as to where Irving might be lying, and as we've said before, it's quite possible that his body could have moved anyway due to geologic and meteorological activity on the mountain. Another rumor is that both bodies have been removed and are in a museum somewhere in China. Look, I know China's secretive and stuff, but if their bodies are in a museum on public display, someone's gonna know about that. Someone's gonna talk. It's gonna make its way onto the internet. I suppose we must point out that Chinese mountaineering authorities say that none of this is true and they haven't done anything with the bodies. I'm pretty inclined to believe them. The China moved them idea is verging into conspiracy theory territory, and while we're definitely up for some of that on this channel, all we have in this case are a few rumors and second and third-hand accounts. Here's one such example from a website called explorersweb.com, which mentions Mark Sinnott, the climber, looking for Irving, who we mentioned a minute ago. Quoting, retired US Marine Wayne Wilcox reported that he was in Beijing for the Olympics when his wife had a conversation with a British diplomat. The diplomat told her that he had previously talked with Pan Duo, the only female member of the 1975 Everest Northside expedition. She became the first Chinese woman and second woman overall to summit Everest. Apparently, Pan Duo told the diplomat, who told Wilcox's wife, who told Wilcox, who told Sinnott and Tom Pollard, that the climbers had found a body at about 8,200 meters. Oh, come on. It's like, yeah, no. It's literally just like Chinese whispers. Quote continues, she mentioned there was a camera with the body, but when the film was developed in Beijing, the film had no pictures. Oh, and she later spoke to journalists. According to Wilcox, she changed her account and said that she recalled no camera. If this story is true, it means the failure to develop the pictures still leaves us in the dark as to the summit attempt. But this story is third or fourth hand, and the alleged originator of it changed the most salient detail at a later date, so we can't really put much stock in it as reliable evidence. So let's end with a bit more muddying of the waters. In 2010, a documentary film came out called The Wildest Dream about Mallory's disappearance, which included two climbers, Conrad Anker and Leo Holding, taking on the second step after removing the ladder the Chinese had installed and with no supplemental oxygen. Here's what Holding says about it. Quote, people go on about how the second step is a 90-foot cliff, but to climb it, it's more like a 12-foot cliff. There's a gully and an exposed step, but that section is not hard. Then there's a snow patch and the vertical section. It was easy. I was a bit disappointed. I'd been worrying whether I was going to be able to do it. They could have done it. No question. End quote. Holding was about 7 years younger than Mallory at the time and in better health with a far better support team behind him. Steady on. I'm 37. I was the same age as Mallory. I happen to be fitter than when I was 30 because I started caring about my health. But I don't think there's that much of a difference between a 37-year-old and a 30-year-old. Is there? Is that? Are you going downhill that much in 7 years? He was also tackling the step many decades after Mallory, so there would have been melting and erosion since then. He also wasn't caught up in a snowstorm at the critical moment, so wind your neck back in, mate. Yes, please do. Thank you. In this case, the lack of evidence is the only evidence we have that Mallory and Irving might have got to the top of Everest before Hillary and Norgay. For his part, Sir Edmund Hillary seems fine with the idea that Mallory might have beaten him to it because, like Mallory's son, he puts as much emphasis on the descent as the ascent. He's quoted as saying, "If it were discovered that Mallory had, in actual fact, set foot on the top of Everest, obviously it would make some difference to Tenzing and myself. For 33 years, we have been regarded as the heroic figures who first reached the summit of Everest. Well, now, I guess we'd just be downgraded a little bit for being the first two men who reached the summit and actually got down safely again." Which brings up a point, of course. If you climb a mountain for the first time and die on the descent, is it really a complete ascent of the mountain? I'm rather inclined to think personally that maybe it's quite important, the getting down, and the complete climb of a mountain is reaching the summit and getting safely to the bottom again. I mean, I get your point, Edmund, but I think, yeah, it counts. It's like if you send someone on a one-way trip to Mars and then they die on Mars, you're like, oh, they never went there. They weren't the first person on Mars. Of course they were. They're just dead. Well, of course, I'd personally think that because he was the first to do it. If it got stuck halfway on the way back and had to be airlifted off, it'd probably still claim the title of first to summit, don't you think? I mean, I would. If the camera, or possibly even two cameras, are still on the mountain somewhere, we might get an answer to this mystery. But until then, all we've got is wishful thinking and the hope that wherever they are, George Mallory and Sandy Irving are resting in peace. Thank you for watching. Remember, you want to buy this script? Signed? Check out the merch store. There's a link below. And I'll see you next time.